Grace and peace, beloved of God. This is Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's version of Shatter the Silence. We are going to be discussing domestic violence and gun violence on this week. Hey, Kelly. We've had some interesting topics, I believe, over the past few weeks. The first week we did an overview regarding domestic violence just overall. There's so many layers to this topic. Then the next week we talked about safety planning. We spoke and discussed the topic, are you a flying monkey? Then the next week we discussed men are victims too. And last week we talked about when domestic violence in the workplace converge, when they find themselves in the same area or whatever. Hey, Rosalind, hello. Hello, everyone. And so, we're grateful to the Lord for what he is doing. He's really given us a burden regarding domestic violence because it has like a stranglehold on his church. And frankly, the Lord wants his church back. He's not really happy with the condition we've allowed it to devolve into. So we're scheduled to have a guest on. I'm waiting for him to pop up here so that I can add him. But we're going to have a guest. And so I just want to say that we talked about workplace violence last week, right, on Thursday. And then the mass shooting occurred in Virginia Beach, Virginia, the following afternoon at like 4 p.m. And, I just want to stress to you all that when the Lord gives us something, first of all, when we decide what our topics are going to be from week to week, we are doing what the Lord has directed us to do in terms of what to talk about. We're not pulling topics out of a hat. We're not, asking anybody else what they think we need to talk about. We spend a lot of time in prayer with the Lord. We ask for his direction and for his guidance because we believe, we know, and we understand that he knows exactly what we have need of at any given time. Hey, Kate. Hey, Minister Gamble. So when these topics are announced, they are as instructed by the Lord. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. I have nothing to do with it. I get to discuss what he tells me to discuss, and I get to pray about what he tells me to pray about, and I just do what I'm told, okay? I just do as I'm told. So the first week we did an overview, then we talked about safety planning, and that video has gotten over 22,000 views worldwide, and we thank God for that. We talked about, are you a flying monkey? One thing about addressing any topic, discussing anything, being a force in terms of making a change regarding the topic is doing an introspection, right? And asking yourself, am I a part of this problem? If so, how am I contributing to the problem? And if I'm declaring that I'm not a part of the problem, what am I actively doing that establishes that? Where's the evidence to support the fact that I'm not a part of the problem? So merely being complacent makes us a part of the problem. Being apathetic makes us a part of the problem. Being self-absorbed makes us automatically a part of the problem. Any problem that we have in society, if we're not actively engaged in trying to fix it by investing of ourself, our time, our emotional strength, our commitment, our finances, then we are part of the problem. Because really all it takes for a problem to exist is for the people who have the power to change it to choose to do nothing for what seems to be good reasons to them, okay? So I don't want to be a part of the problem, and that's not a conversation I want to have with the Lord. When he does call me home, why didn't I do something? I gave you an instruction and you didn't follow it. I'm not trying to have that conversation. So we're going to talk about gun violence on this week. But it was really challenging for us in our spirit on last Friday because there was such a heaviness on Thursday, even when we were doing the broadcast about domestic violence in the workplace. For that to happen. And so we want to offer our condolences to everyone affected by the mass shooting in Virginia Beach. Now, if you can picture that you go to City Hall, you go to the water department, you just go to pay your bill, and someone comes through there shooting people. It's like it's difficult to wrap your brain around, but it's becoming so commonplace in this country. Now, typically, over 50% of people who are the perpetrators in a workplace violence, mass shooting type scenario have a history of domestic violence. We don't know that. about this gentleman. We don't know that he had that history, but we do know that he was married and he's been divorced for about 1.5 years. So something clearly went wrong in the relationship. All right. Initially, they stated that there was no indication, there was no sign, there was no problem, and everything in my spirit said that's not accurate. What happens is this, beloved: we don't pay attention. We dismiss things, we explain them away, we make excuses for them. We feel like we're judging if we say what we're actually looking at, or that we're being negative. You know, and so what it does is it allows that darkness, it allows the isolation, the depression to just take hold of folk, and then they act out. And so the thing is, it's very unlikely that there was zero indication that he was not okay. His neighbor says that he noticed I think it was a female, that she noticed him sitting in his vehicle very early on Friday morning, like at 6 something in the morning. And normally he doesn't go to work that early, and he was just staring straight ahead. What's normal about seeing somebody sitting in their vehicle just staring straight ahead as the sun comes up? That's not normal, especially if you don't normally see that. So there were indicators. There are also reports that he had a physical altercation with coworkers prior to this. So if you have a quiet, soft-spoken person who is suddenly becoming irritable and agitated to the point where a physical altercation occurs, is that not abnormal? Is that not abnormal? It doesn't appear that that's the way he typically conducted himself. Okay? So we must, at a minimum, right? Even if you want to look at it from a purely selfish perspective, at a minimum, we need to pay attention to our own surroundings so that we can understand what's going on around us when people are having a shift in mood, when they're under a lot of pressure. And it has to be pressure to them. It doesn't need to be something that we believe is legitimate pressure. Okay? So I just wanted to say that. And the other unusual thing about the shooting, the mass shooting in Virginia Beach, is that the shooter was African American. Now, I'm not saying that African Americans aren't capable of this behavior, but I am saying that statistically, normally, African Americans, that's not the way they act out. That's not the way they act out. So we tend to not do that. So it's unusual that he did that. It appears, well, he worked there, so he had a key card, right? But it appears that he walked through very methodically and shot people. So because he worked there, and these were his co-workers, he knew where everyone was. One co-worker said he passed him 3 times that day. He never said anything to him. He made eye contact with him. He had the gun in his hand. The co-worker thought they were in a drill and that he was either the supposed to be the bad guy in the drill, or he was supposed to be a good guy looking for the bad guy. Never occurred to him that this guy was getting ready to shoot up the building. But he's walking around with the gun in his hand. Right? He used a silencer. His weapons were purchased legally, which lets you know that even having gun laws in place does not necessarily make us safe. That when you look at background checks, right? And I'm a gun owner. I'm a veteran. I'm not afraid of guns. I'm not. Okay, so, and yes, I'm an apostle with a firearm. I sure am. Here's the thing. The background check is only going to work if there's a background to be checked, right? So enter our corporate complacency. When there are illegal actions that take place, when there are domestic violence incidents and they're not reported, okay? If I'm involved in a domestic violence incident and I don't report it, typically it happens again, and I'm probably not going to report that either. It may happen again. It may escalate to the point where someone outside of the relationship now gets involved. Now it becomes a matter of record. But if this person comes completely unhinged before there's anything on the record, there is nothing preventing them from purchasing a firearm. And the reason that they can purchase the firearm is because when they broke the law and committed domestic violence, it was not reported. I'm going to just let that sink in. When we don't obey the law that is already in place, right, you can expect a problem. It's contributing to a greater problem. So every rule, every law, just in life, typically developed because there was a problem, right? The law didn't usually precede the problem. Typically, there's a problem. It becomes a greater problem. And a law or a rule is put in place to contain the problem. When we circumvent it, no matter what excuse we use, we can get deep and mystical, sprinkle it with scriptures, sprinkle fairy dust, call down fire from on high. At the end of the day, if someone has been engaged in a domestic violence incident and it's not reported, you're setting yourself up. First of all, the next time when you do report it, as far as anybody's concerned, that's the first time. It might be the 51st time, right? So that means that the attention that is brought to bear on the situation, right? Even for something like you want to get a restraining order. If you go to the judge and say, well, they looked at me funny from across the room and they pinched my arm one time, you're probably not going to get one. But if you're telling them that and you're omitting the fact that 10 other times they did other things and they strangled you and they kicked you and bit you and punched you and locked you out of the house, you probably get it. You understand what I'm saying? So when we minimize the problem, especially in the name of spirituality, we need to stop that. But when we minimize the actual issue and the actual challenge, we cannot get the proper strength of help that we need. And that applies to the Word of God. That applies to the law of the land. Okay, if we're not transparent about what is actually occurring, we are a part of the problem. No matter what excuse we give, no matter how we dress that thing up, we are a part of the problem. We are. Okay? And so this is what happens. So many times people will try to go get restraining orders and they can't get them because all these other times you're not reporting it. You're not reporting it, and the law is not designed to overreact, right? So if we minimize what our issue is, we cannot get the proper help, even if there are those who stand ready to help us. And so it's so important that we become more responsible and accountable and understand that God, even from a spiritual standpoint, does not need for us to minimize anything. He is the God of what's actually going on, not the watered down version that we don't mind people knowing about. He's already God. But we have to acknowledge that there's an issue. And we have to acknowledge that we need help with it. And then we have to avail ourselves of the help that is available to us. Okay? So I just wanted to say that. And again, praying for those who were affected. How horrific it must be for somebody that you know and that you've worked side by side with for 15 years to come through and shoot you. I mean, so the PTSD, the trauma that they will have to deal with after this, those who have survived, the loss that the families are dealing with, all of that. His own family, who at least had the decency to release a statement expressing their condolences. I can't imagine what it must feel like to have a family member that has brought that much pain to so many other people, So much prayer is needed in that area. Now, I wanted to share with you. Let me see if my guest. I don't see them. Oh, where are you? Don't see you. Hopefully he will come on. I don't know where he is. Okay. So I want to share some statistics with you, okay? Just so that we can put this in perspective, what the connection is between domestic violence and let me move this chair. What the difference is between the connection between domestic violence and firearms. And tomorrow is National Gun Violence Prevention Day. Tomorrow is, and so people are supposed to wear orange in support of it. If you are interested. Gun Violence Awareness Day. Okay, so 20% of intimate partner violence victims are not the partners themselves. And I've touched on this before, but it's important for you to really, really think about this. 20% of intimate partner violence victims are not the partners themselves, but family members, friends, neighbors, persons who intervened, law enforcement, first responders, and bystanders. So this is why we say that there's something that each of us can do in order to kind of curb the tide of domestic violence. And we may not all be able to be upfront and personal in the venue where all of this action is taking place, but there is something that we can do, okay? when you do get engaged, when you do involve yourself, you do become a target. Because the abuser is really resentful of anything that supports his victim gaining strength, gaining independence, understanding who they are, understanding that they have value, the desire to reclaim their life. So if you play that role in a victim's life, right, and you're encouraging them to be all that God intended them to be, and that you are reminding them that they have value and that Christ died for them, and that means that they are important and they have a right to live without being mistreated, you're not going to be a favorite person of the abuser, okay? The presence of a gun, and you hear me say this almost every week because it's important. The presence of a gun increases the risk of homicide in a domestic violence situation by 500%. And I think, and I would like my guest, if he gets on here, I don't see him yet. I think it's because guns create distance. You don't have to be very, very close to a victim to use it, to execute a homicide. It creates distance. It just does. And most other means of homicide would require that you get closer, make eye contact, whatever. So it's impersonal. It's very impersonal, and I think it makes it easier. And it's a one or two steps and you can execute it, so it's not a complicated thing. It's not something you have to think about. You don't have to get close. You don't have to maneuver or anything like that. The FBI defines a mass shooting as an incident where 4 or more, not including the suspect, are killed. So there's actually a definition for mass shooting, okay? Data refutes the idea. This is important because I've heard this before. That if guns are not available, the abuser will simply use another means to commit the homicide. And so the data does not support that statement. And again, I think it's because guns are so impersonal. They're so impersonal. And it's easy to use when you're angry, when you're raging, when you're being irrational. And so I think that's probably has a whole lot to do with it. When it comes to gun violence against women, now listen to this. The U.S. is the most dangerous country in the developed world. The U.S. is the most dangerous country in the developed world when it comes to gun violence against women. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that, okay? So when you compare us to all these other nations that we consider developed nations, we are leading the pack in terms of homicide against women as it pertains to gun violence, okay? Women are 16 times more likely to be shot in the U.S. than any other developed nation. So we have a 16 times greater chance of being shot here in the United States. And in an average month, 50 American women are shot to death by intimate partners. And that's an average. So that means that sometimes it might fall below 50 and sometimes it's above 50, okay? Nearly 1 million women alive today have been shot or shot at by an intimate partner. Nearly 1 million have been shot or shot at. All right? The United Nations says that the most dangerous place for a woman is in her own home. That's where she's the least safe. That's where something is most likely to happen to her. Okay? About 4.5 million American women alive today have been threatened with a gun by an intimate partner. So we're not even talking about shot or shot at. We're talking about aside from the nearly 1 million that we referenced a few minutes ago, that about 4.5 million American women have been threatened with a gun by an intimate partner. 1 in 7 unlawful gun buyers, 1 in 7 unlawful gun purchases were stopped by federal background check. Okay, 1 in 7 of those is a domestic abuser. 1 in 7 of the background checks that don't go through, that allow people to purchase firearms, 1 out of every 7 is a domestic abuser. Now, that takes us full circle to my original contention that if you are involved in a domestic violence situation and you do not report it, then there is no background to be checked. There's no background to be checked. So, if you're involved in a domestic violence situation and you don't report it, you really are contributing to maybe not your own problem if you decide to develop a viable safety plan and exit, but you are contributing to the next person's problem because there's nothing keeping them from buying a firearm. Right? Now, is it impossible to get one? No. You go to someone that's, selling it illegally and you can buy it, but that's a whole lot of extra steps. And it allows some time to calm down, to rethink, decide it's not worth it or whatever. It's not so readily accessible. All right? So having the laws in place where backgrounds have to be checked, actually, it's like having a speed bump. It's like having a speed bump where you have to slow down or you damage yourself. So it gives them time to stop and process and think if there's any chance at all of them changing directions. But if you are a victim and you're not reporting it, even if you do get out, you've set up the next person. Because they don't have a history. They have no history. And even if this next person wants to do a background check, there's no background to be checked because you didn't report it. So it kind of goes full circle to that whole selfish mindset that we can develop when we find ourselves in an unhealthy position, okay? It's important for me as a victim to get out. But is it not also important that I not pave the way for someone else to become a victim? Don't I have some responsibility for that? I know this person is a criminal. I know this person is capable of killing someone, strangling someone, threatening their life, punching them in the face or whatever, and I don't say anything at all. So I'm leaving him or her out there roaming free, right? Roaming free to do what they wish. So even if the next person is responsible, right, and they don't have rose-colored glasses and they say, you know what, I'm going to do a background check because there's just too much. There's too much going on in society today. There's no background to be checked because you, as the current victim, didn't report anything. So that's really like empowering them to continue to hurt people. God wants us to be more responsible and more accountable and more engaged in caring for one another. We're supposed to take care of each other while we're here, right? We're supposed to help each other. We're not supposed to contribute to the downfall of the person that comes behind us or the people that are around us, all right? So I just want to really emphasize that. Since its inception in 1998, the Federal Criminal Background Check System, or NCIS, has blocked more than 300,000 gun sales to domestic abusers. So that means that there's a very large percentage of people who are abusers, both male and female, who seek to own a firearm. Now, the Dwayne Craddock, the shooter in the Virginia Beach shootings that just occurred last week, purchased his firearms legally. But if he didn't have a record that indicated that he shouldn't have it, then there you go. If he had other issues that should have been reported that weren't reported for whatever reason, then there you go. So to a very large degree, the reason that these things can continue to happen is because we have become so complacent. And these things happen and you may or may not hear about them. There were several school shootings last year that I didn't even hear about them until the end of the year. And I was like, when did that happen? So the news media is not even reporting it. It's almost like if the body count's not high enough, then it doesn't get any airtime. Okay. So I wanted to also talk to you about, let's see. There are only 15 states that require abusers that are subject to final domestic violence restraining orders to relinquish their firearms. 15. That's not even half of the states that comprise the United States of America. So only 15 states require that if you have a history of domestic violence, if you have a restraining order, that you relinquish your firearms because of the restraining order. What kind of sense does it? I can't even call that a loophole. I don't know what that is. You could drive a 18-wheeler through the whole left. If a person who has a history of violence can keep a firearm legally, it makes absolutely no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. And these things are allowed to exist because we don't get involved. We don't get involved when it's time to vote. We don't get involved in terms of researching who people are who we're putting in office. We don't get involved in midterm elections. We don't pay attention to the bills that are being introduced and how watered down they are. We don't pay attention to, I know we get a lot of spam and stuff in our inboxes, but we don't look at any of it for the most part, right? So these conditions are allowed to exist that create an untenable, unsafe environment for all of us. It's unsafe for all of us. It doesn't have to be that I did anything to you at all. If you're not stable emotionally and you think I look at you funny, that's all the reason you need. And if you have a firearm, then it's really, really easy to hurt somebody or to not rein in that impulse, right? So think about the people that you come into contact with on a day-to-day basis. Think about how many times maybe you've passed a coworker or whatever and they didn't seem to be quite themselves. Did you ask them, were they okay? Did you offer any assistance? Or did you just keep going? Okay? This is something that we can all be involved in terms of helping to make it better and honestly making it safer for all of us. I don't see. All right, Brother Howard, if you're on here somewhere, you need to let me know so that I can. Whoops, hold on. So that I can get you on here. I'm having issues with this phone, so that I can get you on here.